which you will explain what SESRIC does. Please give a warm hand for Mustafa.
Thank you. I will start by explaining what is SESRIC, since our Director General of SESRIC, Ambassador Musa, is with us. SESRIC is an organization under OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, that is specialized in statistical, economic, social, research, and training. And as you can see from the name, research, data gathering, statistics, social, economic, and training building capacity are very essentials for fragile countries and countries that are trying to rebuild themselves. This is why we have this unique partnership with SESRIC. I am Mustafa from Libya. I happen to be one of the people who participated in the Libyan revolution. I was a computer engineer, and suddenly I found myself as a commander of one of the armed forces that were trying to defend my city, Benghazi. And it was a journey during the revolution to defend ourselves and to fight for our liberty and our freedom. But then, after the revolution was over, we faced a huge challenge and a huge problem, and that is all of these young people who carried arms for freedom and for democracy and for having a decent life. We had to deal with them now, and we had to make sure that they get the life that they fought for. This was our challenge. On the end of 2011, we started this organization. It was called the Warriors Affairs Commission. In the first few months, then the name was changed to be a more suitable name for the new change, and that is the Libyan Organization for Reintegration and Development, the Libyan Program for Reintegration and Development. The question is, when you have armed groups, armed militias, young people who carried arms, which is happening in Libya, it's happening in Syria, it's happening in Yemen, it's happening in many countries. How do you deal with them when the conflict is over? How can you move them from these militias, from these armed groups, to be part of the new state, to be a positive part of the new state? This is the real challenge that we face in Libya, and I'm sure other countries such as Syria and Yemen will face when the conflict is over. There are two ways to dismantle militias or military groups. There is a way of using force by crushing them, and this way has proved to fail in many countries, especially when these young people carried their arms for the freedom of the country, carried their arms to get a better life, carried their arms to have a decent life. The other option is to give them this other opportunity that they seek, to reintegrate them in the new nation, in the new state, in the new society. In Libya, in the end of 2011, early 2012, we started this program where we interviewed each and every one of these thuwar, we call them, or revolutionaries in Libya. And during the first few months of 2011, we interviewed each and every one of them by social advisors, psychiatrists, and we assessed their mental status. And as you might know, that after conflicts and after wars, fighters get affected and need help and need support mentally. So we found out that a certain percentage needed this support. We started up mental center supports in 7 different cities of Libya. And also, we found out that they had their needs. Many of them were jobless. Many of them did not have a good chance to continue their education because of the previous regime. The educational system was terrible in Libya and was corrupt. So many of them wanted a new opportunity, either in starting up their own business or getting a job or continuing their education. So after interviewing them, we found that there are 4 important reintegration areas that we needed to plan for and have our programs for. The most important one, of course, is economic reintegration. SMEs, new businesses. We found out that 42% of them chose to start up their own business. They were fighters, they were revolutionaries, and in the same time, they were entrepreneurs. They had the courage to start up a new business and a new life. 15% only chose to join the military forces and the security sector. They wanted to join the police or the army or the security sector. And we also had our program for social and civic integration. A big mistake that many of the states and the countries after conflict do is that they don't put into consideration that these people who fought, who were part of the conflict, should be part of the new political system. Political inclusivity and political integration is very important. So we had our program for civic orientation and civic education to try to convince them that the way for change is not anymore with your weapon. The way of change now is different. You have to participate in the democratic process, join the political parties, and vote to make the change happen. So these reintegration programs are essential for moving young people from weapons to participate in rebuilding the state. You can confront many of these militias, you can fight them, but you will not reach to stability and peace in the country. I will elaborate a bit on our most important project, which is the SMEs project. Many of these young people, as I said, are courageous. They took the chance to participate in a revolution, which meant that they are ready to take the risk to start their own business. In Libya, unfortunately, like many countries after conflicts, the policies, the regulations that were inherited from the previous government were not supportive to the private sector or the new entrepreneurship environment. In Libya, during the time of the previous regime, for 40 years, it was a closed economy controlled by the government, by the public sector. More than 80% of the Libyan people were employed by the government. So the main challenge now is to diversify the economy, to open the economy for the private sector, change policies, change regulations, and encourage young people to start up their own business, encourage young people to be innovative and choose new opportunities. We went about this by starting up an SMEs program. Mainly, we started up with educating these young people on how to start up their business. What are the opportunities in the Libyan economy? As you might know, Libya is a large country on the Mediterranean, north of Africa, has more than 5,000 kilometers of border with many different states, from Tunisia to Algeria to African countries. So there are vast opportunities in the country. But how to trigger these opportunities, how to give these young people the ability to start up their own businesses, this is our challenge that we are still working on and we are still tackling. And we are starting from the first phase, which is changing the policies, changing the laws, changing the regulations, and then building up the capacity of these young people. We chose from all over Libya 60 young revolutionaries who are graduates of finance, economics, and different business and different areas that are related to SMEs. We train them to be mentors. So they would go and train the rest of these young people to start up their own businesses. We developed an SME incubator in the city of Benghazi to incubate these young people and to start up their own businesses. Unfortunately, in 2014, Libya re-entered into conflict, and some of these programs, we had to hold them. But again, whomever had joined these programs, either the educational or the small business, or joined one of the opportunities we gave them, we managed to rescue them from the current conflict. So, in my opinion and from my experience, reintegration, giving extremists, radicals, young people who carried arms for many reasons, an alternative opportunity, sitting with them, discussing with them their needs, discussing with them their future, is the solution to radicalization and is the solution to disarmament. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're talking about young revolutionaries reintegrating back in society. And who of you thought of men only or also of women? Because I'm curious, are we only talking about young men being reintegrated, or are you also working with young women?
The revolutionaries in Libya, the ones who carried arms, who we work with, are mainly men. But of course, these programs, you cannot implement them outside of the society and the environment. Therefore, many of the beneficiaries of these businesses and the jobs that are created and the other opportunities, women are also participants in them. For example, the ones who conducted 162,000 interviews with these ex-combatants were the majority women. They were social advisors and psychiatrists, mainly women. And out of 162,000 interviews with armed militants, we did not have one case of harassment or one case we did not have one problem during these interviews.
Well, I'm just asking because I know that the history, for example, in Algeria, but also in Palestine, that when women were on the side of the revolutionaries, when the war ended, they had to go back to the kitchen. But that's not the case in Libya. I'm sure. Everybody has the right to go to the kitchen and cook good food after they had a good day of working as an entrepreneur, no?
Yes, but this is, this has to deal with the arms. Yes. And actually, women in Libya, they participate in the revolution in many ways, in media, in supporting jobs to the militants. But we did not have women who carried arms.
Of course, I mean, I know that, remind me of her surname, Selwa, the woman who was killed in Benghazi. Yes, of course, and I work together with women on the front line. So I'm not trying to wage a Western finger here, but I'm actually honoring the great work of many Libyan women who have been part of the revolution. Now, talking about your experiences, when you look at the Syrian example, how can they benefit? I mean, of course, unfortunately, the war is still ongoing, and one has to wonder until when. But if we're in a post-conflict era, how can the Syrians, also the Syrians in this audience, benefit from your experience?
I had a meeting with a group of the Syrian opposition, Syrian Free Army in Turkey, and this is exactly what we discussed, that they should plan from now on what are the ways they can reintegrate their katibas, they call them, and they're similar to the groups that we had in Libya. So from now, they should have their plans. Plus, they should plan from now what are they going to do when it comes to their security sector reform. Because this is a big challenge. I'm sure they will not keep the same Bashar army. But in the same time, they will need an army. They will not keep Bashar security sector organizations, but they will need a security sector organization and police and so on. So they need to plan from now, because once they are faced with the reality, it will be much harder to plan.
Now, to conclude, if you could reverse or go back in time and benefit from one piece of advice, which one would you like to have received yourself in your work a couple of years ago when you started yourself, which might have been handy to know about?
This is my message to other nations, like the nations that helped us in the Libyan revolution. we got a lot of support from the EU and other nations. What we didn't know that after getting rid of a tyrant or of a corrupted system, you will face the challenges of state building. This, we did not have the experience. So I wish that we knew that after bringing down a tyrant, that we should have concentrated on state building, institution building, security sector building, and of course, before all of that, uniting the people.
Focus on state building and uniting the people. Thank you for this. Please, a warm hand to Mustafa El-Sagizli. I can see that our next speaker is receiving a microphone. That gives me the time to tell you about my first experience with terrorism. I have studied Arabic, and when I started studying Arabic, people told me how smart I was to learn the language of terrorists. But strangely enough, my first real conscious awareness of what terrorism is actually because of an attack in my hometown in Roermond, in the southern part of the Netherlands. Because very close to Roermond was a base of British soldiers. And I remember studying in London at the School of Oriental and African Studies, and we were watching the news, and all of a sudden the market square of my hometown in Roermond was the first item on BBC News. Because in 1990, of course I had experienced some incidents with terrorism already in Egypt, but this came very close because my friends, I was like, what is this? This is the marketplace in my hometown. And what happened was that a group of IRA terrorists mistook 2 Australian tourists for British soldiers, and they shot them point blank in the marketplace in Roermond. And when I am discussing these days about terrorism, terror, people immediately think of terror inspired by Islam or by Islamic trends. But I still have to think of these horrible moments that day at the marketplace in my hometown. And I'm looking at my friends over there, whether David already has a microphone. Do I get a cue? Could I please have a warm applause of David Kenning, who will take us to different ways of looking at terrorism, counter-terrorism and counter-radicalization. A warm applause for David, please.
No, I should be okay. Thank you.
Would you like to sit on the throne?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Let's sit on the throne.
Very
I feel a bit like
appropriate.
Willem-Alexander and Maxima here.
Oh, no,
both
no.
of us in the throne. It
Surely
looks
we
good,
can do a bit better than that, surely.
David, please tell us, what should we need to know about you as an expert in terrorism, counter-radicalization? How should we describe your work and what you do?
Well, I was born and raised in Northern Ireland. I grew up with terrorism in Belfast. I witnessed firsthand, close up, radicalisation of friends, of people I knew. I saw people I knew being killed by other people I knew. I lived with fear, and that experience was absolutely essential for me to understand what radicalisation was about.
You lived with fear.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to explain what living with fear is like, but it's a visceral, bodily thing. It's with you all the time. And I think that a community that lives in fear is necessarily inhibited from communicating. And that was another huge problem. So the demagogues could control and speak on behalf of people who remain silent.
But it was fear of people very close by, not fear of the stranger, the enemy.
That's
far
correct.
away.
It's a completely different dynamic. When communities radicalize, the situation changes completely because terrorists, violent people are supported, they're hidden, they are funded. The police are prevented from going into communities. They become no-go areas. And it's very, very different to what we're witnessing with jihadism and IS, because up to now, the trajectory of jihadism has more or less been the story of individuals, ones and twos. You could say that it's been the defining failure of the Al-Qaeda ideology in 9/11, that it never achieved mass mobilization.
Well, I think people beg to differ when they see the map of Syria and Iraq and they say this big black spot that calls itself the Islamic State, and it looks, and they're talking about thousands of Europeans going. That's not mass mobilization in your mind?
We're still looking at less than 1,000th of 1% of global Muslims. And so it actually is a tiny figure relative to the... If anybody can tell me a better known ideology in the world at the moment, I would listen to them, but I don't see one. So given that the ideology is out there, it's actually very weak and not popular. In fact, it's almost dead.
Well, you were describing your fear when you grew up in Ireland. I think many of us have grown up with the fear of the other being a Muslim, the Huntington's phrase, which I totally don't subscribe to myself, but the clash of civilizations. I mean, why are we, it's almost as if we are addicted to this fear. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, the post-9/11 response defined the conflict with terrorism, the West's conflict, in terms of the clash of civilizations, and that was a huge mistake. It defined things in an aggressive, binary way that actually made the conflict more meaningful for terrorists. It also enabled Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and I was based in Baghdad for 6 years. It enabled Al-Qaeda to recruit under the slogan that Islam was under attack. But also you're either for us or against it. So it actually demarcated the battle lines. And it's been a huge mistake because it's emphasized the power of the ideology wrongly, and it's turned the counter-radicalization process into a giant argument, the counter-narrative, which is an argument we can never win.
I traveled last week to the US. And I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that when you have a passport, a European passport, that you can travel freely to about 170 countries relatively easily. But when you have a passport from Syria or from Egypt, that number is limited to 27 or something. And many of my friends who carry these kind of passports are very often randomly taken out of the queue. And I somehow feel that that breeds radicalization as well, that you're targeted because of your passport, because of your name. How do you see this, also in our own communities?
Well, I think the West is largely responsible for making things worse in the way that we've behaved. We are the people who are radicalized. We're the people who have started wars pointlessly, and the people who have overreacted to this situation, but fail to understand that we're essentially in a psychological war with the fear of terrorism, and populists are taking advantage of that to exaggerate that fear, magnify it. So we're actually caught in a pincer movement between the fear that's emanating from terrorism and domestic populism. And that is giving us, in the West, I think, an autoimmune disease. We are attacking ourselves, and our democratic values are coming under pressure. We saw last week with the election of Trump, we see European demagogues taking heart from that. And I think that we're looking at the difficulties democracies have in dealing with the mass psychology of fear. Without strong leaders, we simply, the leaders back the fear agenda because they're frightened to stand out and criticize a huge part of the population.
Well, if I can